I'm John Citrone here from the Horror Channel with one of my childhood heroes, Herschell Gordon Lewis. How you doing?
Doing fine, John. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thanks so much for doing this. I wanted to start by asking you a couple questions about how you began making films and what drew you to what has become known as the gore genre.
I began making films because I bought into a small film studio in Chicago. I was in the advertising business, and we were shooting commercials, and the fellow who owned his studio needed a partner, he said. And he had hands of gold with a camera, but he was not really business-oriented, so the partnership seemed to make sense. But the problem was that we had only 16-millimeter equipment, and the big advertising agencies would go to California where they shot in 35. I said, aha, I better get us a 35-millimeter camera. Big mistake. Paid a ton of money for a 35-millimeter movie camera, and the big agency still went to California. And one day I was complaining about the nature of business to somebody who really became a major factor in what happened, and yet somebody I didn't know that well. And I said, I can't make any money. He said, well, how do you make any money in the film business? And I said, the only way to make money in the film business is to shoot features. He said, why don't you shoot features? Which is like saying, why aren't you rich?
Right.
But that planted the nasty seed. Well, then the next question was, what kind of movies might I make? One, that I could afford to make. And two, that wouldn't put me in direct competition with the major film companies. Very limited sphere. Even today, it's a limited sphere. And some of the independent stuff I see today, in my opinion, defies the idea of making a movie that somebody will go to see rather than a movie that satisfies your own ego. One of the criticisms that's been leveled at me over the years is that I treat the business as a business. Well, God bless me for that. I do not look at myself as an artist, as you can tell from my output, or an auteur. It's a matter of getting some people to spend money to look at what you've done. So the question then became, what kind of movies might there be the major film companies either wouldn't or couldn't make? Today, of course, the walls are down now. They get wind of some trend, whether it's vampires or whatever, and everybody jumps on it. So Blood Feast, which is recognized as the first splatter film, was purely experimental, and because I had no idea whether or not any exhibitor in his sane mind would show it, because this is before we had not just DVDs but video cassettes.
Right.
You made it in the theaters or not at all. And I had no idea whether after some insane exhibitor said, yes, I'll put it on the screen, somebody would be insane enough to go look at it. So I spent as little money on it as I possibly could, which turned out to be a blessing. Except when we saw the business that Blood Feast was doing, my partner Dave Friedman and I, that was the genesis of 2000 Maniacs, because I said then, what if we made a decent one? And although certainly 2000 Maniacs is not a masterpiece of technical achievement, Blood Feast is primitive on a level comparing it with 2000 Maniacs, which to this day is the favorite of all the movies I've made.
Well, speaking of 2000 Maniacs, and I have to take issue with one thing you said. You said you didn't consider yourself an auteur,
Yeah.
but you are considered an auteur.
By whom?
Well, I think by consumers of the gore genre. You are one of the grandfathers of gore cinema.
Well, yes, but you see, I think where our disagreement lies is in the interpretation of the word auteur. There was no ego factor involved in this at all, and I have sat on sets where the director regards himself or herself, or in my opinion, itself, as a supreme monarch. And if you make a comment about the script, for example, you're attacking my child.
Right.
If you were on the set, for example, of the movie we are going to show tonight, which is called The Uh-Oh Show, you would have seen that anybody could make a suggestion which might well be taken and used on the spot, whether that person's a member of the cast or the crew or just somebody who happened to wander onto our set by accident. To me, an auteur is someone who does not accept that kind of change.
Okay. So Svengali attitude notwithstanding.
Yes, Svengali. I had no trilbies.
Well, but at the same time, you could be considered a person who shaped the vision of gore cinema for at least 20 or 30 years.
I have heard repeatedly, including here, that had we not made Blood Feast, this event would not be taking place.
Right.
And certainly by now, somebody would have come to the conclusion that there might be some dollars and yen and euros involved in making a movie of this type.
Right.
That I made this movie so early on, yes, there's no question of innovation, but I would re-emphasize that innovation and the auteur attitude are not synonymous.
Well, speaking directly to 2000 Maniacs, what were your feelings about, and it being as collective an effort as you suggest, in the screenplay or and at least in the vision of the story, did you have any aspirations to subtext? Because I think some people over the years have at least imposed some sort of social message on 2000 Maniacs. Did you have any?
Oh, no. It was the South gets even. The message, of course, was purely commercial, because at that time when distribution was paramount over any other aspect, including production, our distributor in Charlotte, North Carolina, who handled Charlotte, Atlanta, and Jacksonville exchange areas. See, this country was broken down into 26 exchange areas. And Philadelphia was one, New York was one, Albany was one, Chicago was one, Des Moines, Iowa was an exchange area, and they served theaters in that whole region. Our distributor in Charlotte, North Carolina, was a prime factor in a number of the movies we made, because that territory, Charlotte, Atlanta, and Jacksonville, often would represent at least 25% of the total gross we could anticipate from a movie. And his attitude was, if we could make something that the Southerners would appreciate, that would be a good idea. Okay, this was something we felt the Southerners would appreciate. And getting into the plot line of 2000 Maniacs, it simply evolved that way. People have often told me that they think I adapted Brigadoon. I had never heard of Brigadoon. I have no idea when Brigadoon opened, in fact, in its theatrical exhibitions, but it may have been that we were before that. I don't mind. It doesn't have any effect at all on the movie itself. But the place we shot that, for example, St. Cloud, Florida, I had gone back there 2 years ago, I think it was, because we had something going on in Orlando, and I'd forgotten what the circumstance was. And I expected that to have been simply absorbed into the Disney empire. Of all the areas around there, that one wasn't.
Right.
And here was this old hotel we stayed in and shot, and it was still the way it had been.